Good evening, I'm Jim Lehrer. On the NewsHour tonight, full coverage and analysis of the merger between Chrysler and German car maker Daimler-Benz. A look at a cosmic big bang. And the remarkable story of Viagra, the new sex pill for men. It all follows our summary of the news this Thursday.
Brought to you in part by ADM. Feeding the world is the biggest challenge of the new century, which is why ADM promotes satellite technology to help the American farmer be even more productive. ADM, supermarket to the world.
And by New York Life, the company that was built with integrity, humanity, and strength. These are the values that have made New York Life the company you keep.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
The biggest industrial merger in history was formally announced today. Germany's Daimler-Benz will buy Chrysler Corporation for more than $40 billion. The agreement was signed in London. The combined company will be the world's fifth largest automaker, valued at $92 billion. It will be based in Michigan and Germany and employ 422,000 people. The chairman of the two companies said they expected no layoffs or plant closings. We'll have more on the story right after this news summary. The Senate moved toward a vote to reform the Internal Revenue Service today. Majority Leader Trent Lott and Minority Leader Tom Daschle said passage of the bill was guaranteed. It would address alleged IRS abuses, giving taxpayers additional rights in dealing with the agency, and setting up an oversight board to improve management. Here's a sample of the debate.
No agency touches the lives of Americans more than the IRS. Yet 1 out of every 2 Americans said that they would rather be mugged than audited by the IRS. This bill should reverse that prevailing view among our citizens, be they from New Mexico or Ohio or Delaware.
I want to pay tribute to the devoted men and women who work at the IRS, often under difficult circumstances, inadequate and dated technology, and often poor leadership or supervision. But I do want the IRS to focus on collecting the taxes in the most efficient way, and I want them to go after flagrant tax cheats, tax evaders, drug dealers, and those that we could use the IRS to stop real crime in our country.
The House approved a similar version of the bill last year. On the Starr investigation story today, Betty Currie, the president's personal secretary, was questioned by a federal grand jury in Washington for a second straight day. It is trying to determine if the president and Monica Lewinsky had a sexual relationship and lied about it under oath. Currie was reportedly a friend of Lewinsky's. Secretary of Defense Cohen today ordered a Vietnam veteran's remains exhumed from the Tomb of the Unknowns. There will be an attempt to identify him with scientific methods that did not exist when the soldier was buried in 1984. The Tomb of the Unknowns at Arlington National Cemetery in Washington is a monument to unidentified American soldiers killed in war. On the Middle East peace talks today, President Clinton sent envoy Dennis Ross to Israel to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu. He's to help work out details of an Israeli troop withdrawal from the West Bank. The U.S. wants agreement on that issue before Monday's planned talks in Washington. Netanyahu told reporters today Israel must make its own security decisions, and later President Clinton replied.
I think the assistance of the United States, its friendship and the partnership with it is absolutely important for us. But remember that even among friends there can be disagreements. And in this case, it is agreed between us as friends that on matters of security, Israel and Israel alone is the one that can make the determination.
What we are trying to do now is simply to regain the momentum that has been lost in the past few months, not by imposing our ideas on anyone, because only the parties can make decisions that will affect the lives they have to live, their security, and their future. What we're searching for is common ground to achieve what Prime Minister Netanyahu asked us to pursue a year ago, the start of accelerated permanent status negotiations.
An Israeli cabinet meeting is set for Sunday to discuss the U.S. proposal. Military reinforcements reached Indonesia's third-largest city, Medan, today. Hundreds of ethnic Chinese fled the violence triggered by the country's economic crisis and plunging currency. The Chinese minority controls much of Indonesia's commerce. Their businesses are targeted during episodes of unrest in the predominantly Muslim country. Student demonstrations persisted in the capital, Jakarta, and other major cities. On the tragedy in southern Italy, the death toll rose to 55, 125 more are missing, 1,600 are homeless from mudslides and floods. Paul Davies of Independent Television News reports from the town of Sarno.
The sight of fresh movement of mud on the mountainside above Sarno caused panic. Roads out of the town were jammed with the vehicles of hundreds of families who'd been ordered to leave the area for their own safety. Many of these people had been staying with friends and relatives in what was considered to be the safe side of town, having already lost their own homes to the mud. Left behind in the deserted town were the rescue teams still searching for those missing. Earlier today, the authorities said that as many as 100 people were still unaccounted for in the stricken Campania region. There have been some lighter moments to encourage the rescue teams. A group of children among the patients winched to safety from the roof of a hospital building cut off by the mud. But such moments are the exception. Most of those missing are now believed to be lost, with local and central authorities arguing over whose fault it was that this population was left so vulnerable.
And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to the big car merger, a big bang, and the Viagra story. Spencer Michaels begins our coverage of the Daimler-Benz Chrysler deal.
The merger between Daimler-Benz and Chrysler Corporation was formally announced today at a joint news conference on neutral ground in London.
But this is much more than a merger. Today we are creating the world's leading automotive company for the 21st century, Daimler-Chrysler Aktiengesellschaft. We are combining the two most innovative car companies in the world. And I want to add, this is the largest and biggest industrial merger ever.
And we believe this is just the beginning. We are leading a new trend that we believe will change the future and the face of this industry. As a result of being among the first, we had the ability to choose our favored partners. You now have some idea why we see this transaction as a merger of equals.
The Chrysler Corporation was formed in 1925 and soon ranked as one of the industry's big three, along with General Motors and Ford. In the 1970s, gas prices surged. American car makers, which were producing gas guzzlers, lost market share to foreign companies known for well-made, fuel-efficient cars. Chrysler faced bankruptcy, but with Lee Iacocca at the helm, the company applied for and received a controversial government loan of $1.2 billion. By 1983, Iacocca had turned the company around. It paid off the loans 7 years early. A year later, it reported record earnings with the launch of its front-wheel drive minivans. In 1988, Chrysler took over American Motors from Renault of France, getting its popular Jeep division plus joint ownership of the Beijing Jeep Corporation of China. Iacocca resigned 6 years ago. Robert Eaton was named the company's new chairman. Today, Chrysler's 121,000 employees produce nearly 3 million vehicles, including the Chrysler, Dodge, Plymouth, Jeep, and Eagle, which is soon to be discontinued. Daimler-Benz got its start in 1926 and is now Europe's largest industrial group, a conglomerate of 23 business units that include passenger cars, commercial vehicles, aerospace, and services. Daimler is best known for its craftsmanship, producing the luxury car, the Mercedes-Benz. U.S. sales of Mercedes-Benz have increased 67% this year, in part because of the new M-Class sports utility vehicle. Still, the automaker has just 1% of the U.S. market. Daimler's 300,000 employees turn out 1.1 million cars and trucks. The new company, Daimler-Chrysler, would rank 5th in sales internationally behind General Motors, Ford, Toyota, and Volkswagen. Under the merger, Daimler-Chrysler will have 2 headquarters, one in Michigan, the other in Stuttgart, Germany. Both companies say no plant closings or layoffs are planned. For the next 3 years, Daimler-Chrysler will have joint management. After that, Chrysler chairman Robert Eaton will step aside, and Daimler-Benz chairman Jürgen Schrempp will become sole chairman and chief executive.
We will work together. I only say I support everything he said.
Both corporate boards plus regulators in both countries must approve the transaction.
We're joined now by Klaus Friedrich, chief economist for the Dresdner Bank Group, Germany's second largest bank, Harley Shaken, professor of labor and industrial relations at the University of California, Berkeley, Csaba Cheta, editor-in-chief of Car and Driver magazine, and David Cole, director of the Office for the Study of Automotive Transportation at the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute. Mr. Cole, for the automobile industry generally, how major a development is this?
Oh, this is absolutely huge. It's probably one of the most significant events that we have seen in the last 50 or even more years in terms of the structural change in the industry, and it really may signal a major final restructuring of the industry.
There have been mergers before, there have been large mergers before. Why is this one so different?
Well, it really, I think, is in the context of the new world that we have, where the boundaries are vanishing. We are in a true global environment as far as the auto industry is concerned. And if you're going to be successful in this business, you need economies of scale, strong economies of scale, and you need a global presence. And when you look at the match between products and geographic dispersion, this is a very good match, but it's a large match between 2 very strong and very prosperous companies.
Mr. Cheta, from Chrysler's point of view specifically, why was this a good deal for them?
It was a very good deal for them because it puts them on the track towards that bigness. These days, consumer demand for product refinement is incredibly high. There's regulations all over the world on emissions, on fuel economy, on crash, and it takes a certain amount of size and engineering muscle to satisfy all these standards and still produce a car at a price that the customer wants. You've got to have a certain critical mass to do this, and by hooking up with Daimler-Benz, now Chrysler and Daimler-Benz together are a large enough company to do this effectively.
And Chrysler could not grow on its own, in other words. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's very hard to grow on its own. Chrysler is in the United States. The United States is a mature car market. It doesn't grow very rapidly. Chrysler has tried to grow in Europe. It's made some progress there, but Europe is also a very mature car market. So it's very difficult to grow yourself into a much larger car company.
So a good thing for Chrysler.
Very good thing for Chrysler.
Now, Mr. Friedrich, for Daimler-Benz, why is this a good thing?
I think some of the same reasons. Daimler has had problems in the last recession. They have restructured. They have become very lean and very mean and profitable, and now they're ready to go global. And when you want to go global, you cannot ignore the American market. And I think this is the move for the American market.
So the point that Spencer Michaels made in his piece, that Mercedes-Benz sells very well here in the United States, but it still only has 1% of the market, is key to why they wanted to merge.
That's exactly right.
Why they needed Chrysler?
1% is not a significant share of the market. Daimler wants more.
Yeah. All right, now, Harley Shaken, how is this going to affect the workforces in these two companies?
Well, I think it's going to have a positive effect on the workforce, at least in the near term. There are several short-term things that could benefit the union. One, in the United States, Mercedes' new plant in Alabama is currently non-union. It's one thing to have a non-union Mercedes plant in Alabama, and quite another to have a non-union Chrysler plant in Alabama. So the fact that this merger is taking place undoubtedly will put additional leverage for that plant to become unionized. Also, in addition to that, there are new talks that are going on as a result of the merger between the UAW and its counterpart, the IG Metall in Germany, and the Canadian Auto Workers in Canada. So this merger among two very large companies is in turn having an analog among its unions. And I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Finally, I think that what we are looking at is the fact that no layoffs in the near term is the dog that's not barking. It's not heard, but that's very good news for the workers in all three countries.
How would you compare the two unions, the strength of the United Auto Workers and the counterpart in Germany?
They're both very strong unions. They both dominate the industries in which they're primarily located, in this case automobiles. The German union has much stronger governmental backing, and the laws in Germany are much more favorable to the union. So it will be interesting to see to what extent that additional dimension within Germany passes over into this new combined entity in the U.S.
Mr. Cole, do you have an opinion on that as to how this could affect these two unions, one in one country, one in another, both very strong and independent in their own rights?
Well, I certainly agree with Harley that I think it's probably going to be good news. There are very different personalities between Chrysler and Mercedes. There are very different personalities between the two unions. I think the interesting thing here is the understanding that the only job security that an individual has, whether working on an assembly line or in a design studio, is a very competitive product in this expanding global marketplace. And the fact that this merger is occurring, I think, is going to really strengthen the prospects that the products and the business is going to be good, which is the real, that's where real job security is.
Yeah. Now, Mr. Friedrich, there's been much discussion in the last 24 hours since the story broke about whether it's workforce or management or finances, products, whatever. There are some cultural differences that have to be dealt with. How would you explain what they are?
Oh, I think it's a question of management. I think it is a question of learning. This is going on all over Germany now. If you want to go global, I think sooner or later you're going to confront the Anglo-Saxon management model. I think Daimler has done that already, sort of internally, and Daimler is ready for it, perhaps more so than many other German companies at this stage.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean the flattening of hierarchies. The old German model has a lot of different levels. Director, sub-director, sub-sub-director, and so on, and everybody addresses each other by its proper title. This has been flattened out at Daimler already, so there's just the boss and then a team of people who work for him. That's the American model. I think it has proven successful for Daimler in its German operations, and so they're a step ahead of other companies in the cultural exchange.
Yeah. Mr. Cheddar, how do you see the cultural challenges that these two companies are going to have to become one?
Well, they currently build very different types of products, of course. Mercedes is building a very high-end exclusive automobile. Chrysler is in the mass market mode. They also manufacture the vehicles differently. Mercedes has a lot more money to play with in their limited volume cars. Reconciling
those... Excuse me, what do you mean? They have more money to...
Well, when you're selling an $80,000 car, you can spend a little bit more money on manufacturing it than when you're selling a $20,000 car. And it's also different whether you're selling 20,000 of them a year or 200,000 of them a year.
Okay.
So those are very different ways of doing business that have to be reconciled. And there's also some just clear, very simple issues such as language. The people who ultimately will run this company probably need to be bilingual. Most of the German managers are bilingual already. When we go over there, I speak some German, but we always end up speaking English because the German managers and engineers speak English very well. I don't think that's true of the Chrysler personnel.
Yeah, Mr. Cole, how do you see the cultural problems ahead?
Well, I think if this were 10 years ago and we looked at the old Chrysler management and the old Mercedes management, I would say this is an impossible situation. But I think when you look at people like Bob Eaton and his philosophy, the new Mercedes and Daimler-Benz management philosophy, I think they have a shared vision. It's one of a world or a global automotive industry. And I think that what really drove this is the fact that they did have a shared vision of the future. And that includes, I think, recognition of still important cultural problems that will be a challenge. But I think that vision will get them beyond those problems. And the fact that if they don't do it, if they don't do the kind of job that they're capable of doing, that's going to give their competitors the advantage.
But what about Mr. Cheddar's basic point that Daimler made one kind of car a certain way and Chrysler makes another kind of car a certain way? Now they're going to try to do it together.
Well, I think that they're certainly going to try to preserve the separation between the products. And clearly, Chrysler is going to try to draw the halo from Mercedes and get people that buy Chryslers to think of them as really a relative of Mercedes. On the other hand, Mercedes is going to work very hard to maintain the separation in products. One of the things I think that Mercedes was really looking at Chrysler is a very lean, efficient, dynamic management structure, generally much leaner than typically that is found in Europe. And that is one of the advantages that Chrysler brings that not just Mercedes wants to copy and emulate, but certainly the other American manufacturers and other European manufacturers want to copy as well.
Harley Shaken, what's your view of that, the lean management model of Chrysler versus Daimler and other companies?
I guess I'd be a little more skeptical than the other guests on this score. I think this is potentially a very promising merger, but I think we have to be a little cautious and look at a bit of history here. After all, the Titanic was large and it was technologically advanced. It's no longer with us. I'm not predicting that for this entity, but there was a coming together of a major U.S. company, Ford, and a major German company, Volkswagen, in the 1980s in their Brazilian and Argentinian operations called Auto Latina. There was a lot of champagne popped at the beginning of that, and ultimately that merger came unstuck.
Why? What went wrong?
The cultures were very different. It was a much more limited undertaking. It's not necessarily a model for what's likely to happen here. I would emphasize this merger has a lot of promise, but the difference between the promise and the reality is yet to be seen. And if there's one major difference here, it is this not simply cultural approach in terms of German and American culture, but a very different approach to building cars. And the way in which that works out, the way the labor issues work out, I think will be essential to seeing whether or not we'll be popping champagne 10 years down the road.
Mr. Friedrich, what's your view of how Daimler and Chrysler must get together and keep making the same different kinds of cars in a way that's compatible?
Yeah, I think you don't merge if you do things the very same way the other guy does it, because then there is no complementarity. You benefit from the difference. I think the fact that they are different will make the merger successful. Mercedes will stick to the high end, and Chrysler will stick to the medium and low end. And in that sense, they will complement each other. And this makes the particular charm of this merger. They are not going to displace each other, but they complement each other.
And Mercedes will not try to get into the low-range market, and Chrysler will not try to get into the high-range market.
I would say certainly the second. In Europe, Mercedes already is trying, but I think there it can benefit greatly from Chrysler technology, front-end drive and other kinds of managerial technology.
Yeah. Mr. Chetta, Mr. Eaton, the chairman of Chrysler said, and we had it on the tape just now, that this is just the beginning. There are going to be more mergers like this in the automobile industry. Do you agree with him?
Well, the pursuit of bigness and the economies of scale and engineering efficiency that it offers are very clear. And a lot of people think that among the 20 or so major car companies today, they're going to be down to 12 in the future. But it's hard to come up with other mergers that are as natural as this one, in which from an international standpoint, the companies complement each other as well, and which from the product standpoint are so good. I mean, these two companies, they have virtually no product overlap whatsoever.
So nobody has to give up anything, you mean?
Exactly. We don't have to sit there and say we've got 3 cars in this segment, we got to kill one of them, and that also is why there are no plant closings involved here, because there aren't those product decisions that have to be made, and it's hard to find other ones that are quite as clean and natural as this.
Mr. Cole, what's your view of that this is the first of many to come?
Well, I think it could be. I think either from an offensive or defensive standpoint, the industry realizes now that the big game has started. That is, the mega companies have begun to come together, and that if you delay, if you wait, the partner that you've coveted might be already gone. That will be one of the most intriguing aspects of this whole story, is what happens tomorrow and over the next couple of years with the rest of the industry. Is this a lead into a major restructuring of the global auto industry? My guess is that it probably is. I think within the next few months we're going to hear about some additional things of
like what?
Not quite, I'm not going to name names or be specific in this respect, but I think that there are talks going on between literally every manufacturer in the world and other manufacturers with the situation in Asia, some of the weakness in some of the companies over there, as well as some of the continuing weakness of companies in Europe, as well as the strength of, for example, the Big Three and the financial strength that they have right now, presents a unique opportunity with weak and strong and strong and strong to combine themselves into what might be a more streamlined industry than we have had. Frankly, we have too much competition today. We aren't getting advantage of the economies of scales that we could. And I think that consumers ultimately really will benefit more by a somewhat leaner, smaller industry in terms of number of players than we have right now.
You see it the same way, Harley Shagan? Excuse me.
A little bit differently here. In a sense, there's a bit of deja vu of the mergers and acquisitions of the 80s and that long-forgotten term synergy. Synergy became a synonym. Yeah. You didn't know what else to say about two big companies getting together. This merger does have promise, but many of the ones that follow in its wake could be far more negative. They may not make sense in financial terms. They could have more negative implications for labor. In this case, you have two strong unions in two highly unionized markets. But one of the fascinating dimensions here, will Mercedes take Chrysler's leaner approach, in many ways reflecting the tougher times of the 80s that Chrysler went through in this country, and seek to import it to Germany? So I think just because a big merger has taken place ought not to blind us to the fact that we should scrutinize these kinds of developments fairly closely. Just because two big companies get together doesn't mean it's better.
Mr. Friedrich, do you see more coming?
I'm not enough of an expert. I think, I'm from the banking industry, and there we had some of the same. We had big mergers, Citi and Travelers, and everybody thinks now this kicks off a major merger movement. I can't exclude that in the automobile industry, but as it has been said, this is the ideal one, and it's usually the first one that gets the best deal.
Okay. Gentlemen, all four, thank you very much. Still to come on the NewsHour tonight, from science, a big bang, and from medicine, Viagra. Bill Ponce has the science story.
Astronomers have found evidence of what may have been the most powerful explosion since the universe was created in the so-called Big Bang. In fact, the light from this explosion is believed to have been so strong that for a few seconds it was brighter than all the stars in the universe put together. Here with more on the discovery is David Helfand, Professor of Astronomy at Columbia University. Welcome, Professor Helfand. First of all, what kind of an explosion are we talking about? What blew up?
Well, for the past 30 years, since we first detected one of these intense flashes of high-energy radiation from a random spot in the universe, we've wanted to know the answer to that question. And while I certainly can't say today we know the answer, at least we've taken one big step towards it, in that at least we now know where the flash came from.
And before we get to where the flash came from, just how big of a flash was it? How much energy was involved?
Well, it's hard to compare to human scale terms. The most energetic explosion we've known of in astronomy prior to this is the collapse of a massive star at the end of its life, what we call a supernova. For the 10 seconds this was shining in gamma rays, it was about 5 billion times as bright as this supernova.
And how do you know what happened? What evidence do you have?
Well, on December 14th, a little before midnight, Rome time, an Italian satellite, which has been designed to detect these sources, recorded a flash in their cameras of gamma rays from a random spot in the sky. The great advantage of this camera over all previous ones is that it's able to localize the direction from which the flash came, in this case to an area maybe 5% the size of the full moon.
Now, we have some pictures that were provided to us of for want of a better term, we're calling an afterglow. The first picture that we have was taken a day after the event was first, the night after the event was first observed, and the second one we see where the afterglow is fading, even in relative proximity to when it was first observed. What do these images tell us, Professor?
Well, what happened was that around midnight New York time, I got a call from the group in Rome who said, we have a burst, we need a telescope. So I called our MDM observatory in Arizona, where one of my colleagues, John Thorstensen, was on the telescope with a camera that could take a picture of just this piece of the sky. The first image you saw was the night of the burst itself, about 8 or 10 hours after the explosion, and the second was taken the next night. You see, all the other stars and galaxies in that image are unchanged because most things change very slowly in astronomy. Stars live for billions of years. But that one you have a circle around faded by a factor of 5 from one night to the next, and that's when we knew we had pinpointed the location of the burst.
And further evidence of where this burst came from was provided through the Hubble telescope. We have some images from that, and tell us what we're looking at, these color images here.
Well, that little spot in the center there now is no longer the burst, because this is taken 4 months later and it's faded away. But what it shows is the host galaxy, the location where the burst took place, which turns out, with the Keck observations that our colleagues at Caltech made, to be located more than 3/4 of the way across the universe.
Taking these images together, what can you conclude?
Well, the first and most important inference we can make, since we now know the distance of about 12 billion light years, we can calculate how much energy must have been involved in the burst at the source. And that's what comes out to this enormous number, much greater than anything we've seen exploding before.
And you just mentioned 12 billion light years, so it took place 12 billion years ago, and how long ago is the universe believed to have been created?
This is about 85% of the way back to the beginning of time. The burst indeed took place about 8 billion years before the Earth even formed, and it's been traveling to us through space all that time, just arriving on December 14th.
So basically, we are getting images of something that happened a long time ago. And explain how that works, that's something that happened billions of years ago. The evidence of it just is now arriving, so to speak.
That's right. Whenever we look out into space, we're effectively looking back into time, because light travels at a finite speed, albeit very fast, something like 6 trillion miles a year, but that's a short distance in the space of the universe. As a consequence, whenever we look at a star or a galaxy, we're looking at the light and the star and the galaxy as it was many years, millions of years, or even billions of years, as in this case, ago, when it left that object, and it's been traveling to us ever since.
So it's kind of a visual echo?
In some sense.
Does this explosion have anything to do with the Big Bang, or is there any connection between it and the Big Bang?
Well, the Big Bang really is not an explosion in the normal sense. An explosion takes place at some point in place, at some moment in time. The Big Bang created time and space itself. So it really is a more universal event. But this occurred 85% of the way back in time to when the Big Bang occurred.
And Professor, the $64,000 question, what caused it?
What caused it? Yes, well, as I said, we've been waiting for 30 years to answer that question, and we've only taken the very first step along the road to the answer. There are about 150 separate theories that have been published for the origin of gamma ray bursts over the last 30 years. This destroys about 146 of them or so, but there are a few that are still viable.
In fact, we have some animation which illustrates one of the theories. What theory does this particular animation suggest?
This suggests the little white thing, which is a neutron star, is falling into a black hole. A neutron star is the densest form of matter we know, 1 billion tons per teaspoonful, an entire star compressed into something smaller than Manhattan. If it's eaten by an even larger black hole, an enormous amount of energy will be released in the last few seconds as it spirals in, and this animation is meant to illustrate what could possibly produce the burst from that event.
Do you personally have a particular theory that you're subscribing to?
I try to stick to the observations and let the theorists remain with their speculation.
Professor, if this was such a big explosion, why is it that it's just discovered now?
Well, we see one of these bursts arriving from a random direction almost once a day. So there are lots of these going on in the universe. The thing is that till now we've never known how far away they are, and therefore didn't realize how enormously energetic they were.
Based on the sequence of events that led to the observation, it strikes one that some luck was involved in observing this. Was this a lucky find?
Yeah, I think this is a good example of the role serendipity plays in scientific discovery. If I hadn't been in my office on a Sunday evening at 11 o'clock, which is probably the only time in 20 years I've been there, I wouldn't have received a phone call, and we might have missed the opportunity to pinpoint the location of this burst.
Because you got the phone call, you were able to alert people to take pictures of it.
That's correct.
Well, it sounds like it was sort of in the stars for this to happen, yeah. What's been the reaction in the scientific community to this?
Well, most of my colleagues who have been generating these models for how these bursts might occur are nonplussed, I think is the best way we can say it. They see most of their theories evaporating and are scrambling to find others. The reason this is exciting, I think, beyond just the solving of this old mystery, is that it probably will provide us an opportunity to test the laws about the interaction of matter and energy and space and time that we derive in our earthbound laboratories in a situation that's much more extreme and therefore pushes these laws to their limits. If they pass the test, we have much greater confidence in our understanding of the physical universe. If they fail, it provides an opportunity for us to explore and expand our understanding of space, time, matter, and energy.
And how about for the layperson, aside from what it might mean within the scientific community, what does this mean to a layperson?
I think everyone loves a mystery, and so the fact that we've taken the first step towards a solution but don't yet even have a viable model is a story that's worth telling. But again, I think it's the role that astronomy's played over the last several centuries of allowing us to expand the bounds of our knowledge beyond our laboratories on Earth to a much grander scale, and therefore understand things in a much deeper perspective.
Professor Helfand, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
The Viagra story. Kwame Holman begins.
It's being hailed as the new best friend to thousands of men. Viagra, a drug developed by Pfizer Incorporated, has proven effective at reversing male sexual impotence with few side effects. Generically known as sildenafil, Viagra was approved 5 weeks ago by the Food and Drug Administration. Since then, doctors have written thousands of prescriptions, and pharmacists have struggled to keep the small blue pills in stock. A urologist group estimates 30 million American men have some form of impotence. They are unable to achieve or maintain an erection for physical and/or psychological reasons. Dr. James Regan is a urologist at Georgetown University Medical Center in Washington, D.C.
Viagra is designed to increase the blood flow into the penis, and that, after all, is what an erection is. So, very simply, it enhances the blood flow down into the penis, resulting in an erection.
Most current treatments for impotence are painful or intrusive. They include penile implants and direct injections of drugs. Viagra goes to work 1 hour after being taken orally, and Pfizer is working on a faster-acting form of the drug.
The patients have really come to the office in unprecedented numbers looking for a prescription for the medication.
Drug maker Pfizer reports more than 30,000 prescriptions for Viagra were written the first week the pill became available, 110,000 in the second week, and now, after a month, some 350,000 prescriptions for Viagra have been filled. The cost is about $10 per pill. So far, Viagra is not covered by most health plans. Dr. Regan warns Viagra has shown some mild side effects.
In the clinical trials that were done for the Food and Drug Administration, roughly 10 to 15% of patients reported a flush feeling in their face, maybe a headache, sometimes a stuffiness in their nose, or a little bit of indigestion. Curiously, 3% of the patients in the Food and Drug Administration trial reported difficulty distinguishing blue and green colors for about 20 or 30 minutes after they took the pill.
That last finding prompted the American Academy of Ophthalmologists this week to recommend that men with severe vision problems not use Viagra. The group also called on the Food and Drug Administration to conduct further testing. Researchers say Viagra has not been shown to improve the sexual performance of men not suffering from medical impotence. The question of Viagra's effect on women currently is being examined in clinical trials in England. The huge stir caused by the new drug has been fueled by late-night talk shows, magazines, and newspapers around the country. On Wall Street, the value of Pfizer stock shot up to $106 a share from $70 a share 2 months ago. Analysts predict Viagra sales will top $5 billion in the next year.
And to Elizabeth Farnsworth in San Francisco.
And now a discussion of the Viagra phenomenon. Dr. Ira Charlap is Assistant Clinical Professor of Urology at the University of California, San Francisco School of Medicine. Eileen Pallas is a clinical psychologist at Tulane University Medical Center, where she will also direct the Center for Sexual Health, which will open in July. Paul Wolpe is a sociologist and bioethicist at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine's Center of Bioethics. And Chip Kahn is the Chief Operating Officer and President-Designate of the Health Insurance Association of America, representing 250 health insurance carriers. Thank you all for being with us. Dr. Charlap, how strong is the demand in your practice right now?
It's very strong, Elizabeth. There's been a pent-up demand of men who have had this problem, who have known that the drug is coming for at least 6 months. And so there's been a tremendous response of patients who want to take the drug.
What kind of stories do they tell you? What are they telling you after they take it?
Patients typically say that they feel like they did 20 or 30 years ago. They're having a great improvement in their sexual pleasure and performance, and a great improvement in self-confidence. I've had one patient who was injured in an automobile accident over 30 years ago and had been impotent since then. He's now having sex again with his wife.
Eileen Pallas, let's talk a little bit about the problem this is aimed at solving. How important is male erectile dysfunction for a relationship, for example? What do you find in your practice?
A sexual response is made out of two components. The physiological, such as blood flow, which is what Viagra is targeting, but also the cognitive, that is the thoughts, the feelings, and the expectations you have about yourself, your body, and your ability to get sexually aroused. What I found in my research is that changing expectations increase blood flow within 30 seconds. So that's how quickly your mind can affect your body. And I think that you need to take both of those components into account in any treatment program. If you look at just physiological treatments without taking the other component into account, that is the thoughts that may either have caused the problem or that maintain the problem, then I think you have a less effective treatment. Really, the treatment for sexual difficulties is the marriage between mind and body, the cognitive and the physiological, which gives us our greatest potential for sexual health.
But Ms. Pallas, this will help in many cases, will it not? You're not saying this is not a really useful treatment.
I think it's a wonderful treatment, and it certainly will be helpful. But again, I think it's important to recognize the thoughts and their effect on physiology, that we can't just take a physiological treatment, because even if it's a purely physiological problem, such as diabetes, that has an impact on how you feel about yourself, how your self-confidence, your self-esteem, and your relationships. So really working the two together, which we know with other problems such as depression, is the most effective for whole mind-body health.
And Dr. Charlotte, just so we have this clear, this is not an aphrodisiac. You still have to experience desire to have this work, right?
Yes, this drug does not work unless a man has the interest and then initiates sexual activity. If he takes the drug and then doesn't become sexually involved, nothing will happen. He'll waste $9, which is the cost of the pill.
Mr. Wolpe, let's expand this a little bit. This whole question of male sexual function is something that goes back to the very beginning of time. It's been very important in human life for a long time, hasn't it?
Yes. In fact, if you look back, many ancient artifacts show pictures and sculptures of men with erections. Many Neolithic carvings show powerful men with strong erections. The Cerne Abbas giant, which is this large figure cut into the hillside of a countryside in England, is a large figure holding a club with an erection. Even the word potency, if you think about it, shows that connection that's always been made between the male ability to perform sexually and some sense of male strength.
And Mr. Wolpe, there have also long been potions that have enhanced male sexuality, isn't that right?
Well, there have long been potions that have claimed that they enhanced male sexuality, but men have always been looking for these things. Aphrodisiacs for men that promised stronger and longer lasting erections have been used almost as long as aphrodisiacs for women that were supposed to make women susceptible to men's seductions. So the idea that a man is measured to some degree by his ability to perform sexually is a very ancient idea, and it's no different today.
So, Mr. Wolpe, are you surprised by the popularity of Viagra? Has this phenomenon taken you by surprise?
Not at all. I think that virtually everyone expected this to be a fast-selling drug, and a drug that had an enormous capacity for proper and improper use, and I think we're seeing that happening with websites that are offering the drug with the most cursory of examinations and black markets already beginning.
Eileen Pallas, how important is the discussion that's been launched by this drug? People are talking about things that used to be taboo, aren't they?
Yes, I'm glad you raised that. I think that's the silver lining on all of this, is that it certainly is a wonderful and a helpful drug, but in addition, I think, as you can see from your newscast and others around the country, that this is now raising the acceptability of talking about sexual behavior. And I think in our culture that people are very willing to talk about it sort of friend to friend or clinical lore, but fact-based, knowledge-based discussion of sexuality is not nearly common enough in our culture, and I'm very pleased to see that, and I hope that it helps Pfizer quoted 140 million men worldwide with erectile difficulties, 23.5 million women with orgasm disorders, and 15 million women in this country with desire disorders that know that they're not alone, that there's many people experiencing sexual difficulties, and that we do have some very effective treatments available to them, and they feel comfortable seeking that help.
Do you agree with that, Dr. Sharma?
I certainly do, Elizabeth, and I think that's been one of the really good side benefits of this drug. What my observation is that it has decreased the stigma of impotence, and it has desensitized the embarrassment that men feel from having erectile dysfunction, and many, many more are presenting to their doctors for diagnosis and treatment, and that can only be good.
Paul Wolpe, do you agree with that? Do you think that just the discussion is important, or are you worried there's too much hype here?
Well, I think there is too much hype here. The discussion is certainly important, but I do think that there is a problem with this enormous market for people who are looking for sexual enhancement rather than people with impotence, and I think a lot of the potential problems have not been discussed. For example, men who use this drug in order to achieve erection to impregnate their mates, we really don't have any data on what kind of effect a drug like this could have on male semen. We tend to only think drugs affect female pregnancy problems like thalidomide and DES, but we really have no idea what Viagra might do for male reproductive health, and we have no idea what it might do for male reproductive fluids.
Okay, let's start with the first of those issues. How many men want to just improve their sexual performance? They don't really have a big problem with sexuality.
Well, I think there are many men who would like to perform at the maximum of their capacity, but this drug will not make a Superman out of a normal man. And those men who are able to get the drug on the black market or by some other means, but who have normal erections to begin with, will find that it doesn't do them any good, and I think that they will quickly stop using it. There is certainly potential for abuse of this drug, but I think that organizations such as the American Urological Association and other professional organizations working in conjunction with responsible physicians will see to it that this drug is only prescribed in a responsible way to men who have a problem with erectile dysfunction.
And what about the second part of what Mr. Wolpe raised, the problem of side effects? Already the ophthalmologists are concerned about the effect on eyes. Could there be really negative side effects down the line that we just won't know about until it's too late?
This drug was very thoroughly studied. The investigations that were submitted to the FDA involved over 4,000 men. Certainly it's possible that there are complications and side effects that could occur in the future that did not appear in the early studies, but it does seem to be a safe drug and a very effective one too.
Okay, Chip Kahn, let's bring you into this. Who should pay for this? So far, many insurance companies are only paying for it in a limited way. Isn't that right?
That's correct. Right now, insurance companies are taking a very cautious attitude towards this drug. And the reason is because insurance companies are providing coverage that they want to keep affordable. Consumers want affordable health care coverage. And a drug like this has a potential for abuse, and a potential for overuse, and a potential for leading to significant increases in premiums for consumers.
Who do you think should pay for the drug?
I don't know the answer to that question. That's a difficult question, but I don't think there are any underlying ethical issues in this. I think it's strictly an economic issue. Do I want to pay a higher insurance premium to pay for someone else's sexual activity? Well, I might when I reach that point.
Who's paying for it so far among your patients?
For the most part, it's the patients who are paying, but some of the insurance companies are paying for part of the cost or for a certain number of pills per month.
Eileen Pallas, how important do you think this is, and the problem that Viagra is supposed to solve is in people's lives, and should insurance companies pay for it just like they do for other medications? Other medications.
I think that they should. There's been an issue with other medications such as Prozac and birth control pills, but I think that it's important that the insurance companies begin to understand, again, the mind-body link, and that we know that mental health inherently affects physical health. For example, we know that stress and the way people function in the workplace has long-term impacts on immunological functioning, on the likelihood of susceptibility to disease, and even to the length of people's lives and to mortality rates. So sexuality is a very critical part of our lives and our lifestyle and our overall physical health. And the more and the sooner that people recognize that you can't separate that false dichotomy between mind and body, but that sexuality is part of our physical as well as our psychological health, the more I think they'll understand that funding this may in fact help other kinds of physical problems.
Chip Kahn, how do you respond to that?
Well, there are many things right now that improve health that are not paid for. Basically, insurance pays for what's medically necessary, not everything medicine can do. Certain plastic surgeries, in vitro fertilization, there are many things that are very useful, but that the decision's been made to keep premiums down. Insurance shouldn't include that in the packages. Over time, it will be consumers that make the decision about whether they want this to be included in the package and what effect it would have on affordability and how they balance affordability versus offering these new kinds of opportunities to consumers.
Paul Wolpe, do you think that this drug is part of a larger trend in American life where problems that used to be seen as psychological or just part of aging are now being dealt with medically, and is this a good thing?
Well, the medicalization of social problems, the medicalization of diseases like alcoholism, which used to be in the realm of the judiciary, it was drunk and disorderly, now it's a disease. We are medicalizing a lot of social behaviors and then using pharmacological solutions to them. And this is certainly an example of that. And as was said earlier, if you have a couple with a dysfunctional relationship and you add Viagra, you now have a couple with a dysfunctional relationship and an erection. And nothing has really changed. Many men think that they have relationship problems because of their lack of erection and don't understand that they have a lack of erection because of relationship problems. So I think the idea of pharmacological solutions to social problems is a difficult one. This, of course, doesn't apply for those men with organic dysfunction, but I think that is going to end up being a fairly small section of the Viagra market.
Well, before I go to Dr. Charlap on this, where does this leave you, Mr. Wolpe, on the question of who should pay for this drug?
Well, I think it was interesting that Mr. Kahn said that this is not an ethical problem but an economic one, and then asked a profoundly ethical question to illustrate it, which is, do I want to pay for someone else's sexual health, which is an ethical, not just an economic question. I think he's right, though, that consumers are going to make this decision, and what consumers are going to do is demand that their insurance companies pay for Viagra. But that's when the interesting question comes. What is a reasonable dose of Viagra for a week or a month? I understand the California Blue Cross Blue Shield is talking about 6 pills a month. Is that the amount of sex that impotent men are going to be allowed to have according to their insurance companies? These are profound questions that we're not even nearly ready to answer yet, I think.
Dr. Charlap, you had a couple of points to make, I think.
The insurance company is not legislating the number of times per month that its insureds can have sex. It's saying this is what we can afford to pay for. You can buy as many of these as you'd like, have sex as often as you want, but this is the amount that we can afford to pay for this. I have to disagree with Mr. Wolpe about one thing. Let's not forget that there are approximately 20 million men in the United States between the ages of 40 and 70 who have organic erectile dysfunction. They have mild, moderate, or severely decreased erections, and it's on a physical, not a psychological basis. There's a very large portion of the population, particularly men over the age of 50, who have a real organic problem.
Now, Dr. Charlap, what about the hype and disappointment question? Has there been so much hype through no fault of yours and the other urologists, perhaps, maybe just the journalists, on this question that it will inevitably lead to disappointment, as I believe has happened with other drugs?
I've been very surprised at how well the drug is performed in the general population. The history of drug trials is that the drug performs better in the trials because the drug is applied to a very limited number of patients with specific indications. And then when drugs get applied to a larger population, it doesn't perform as well. My experience with this drug is that it has exceeded the performance that I expected of it.
Well, thank you all very much for being with us.
Again, the major stories of this Thursday. Germany's Daimler-Benz and Chrysler announced the largest industrial merger in history, and the Senate moved toward passing a bill to reform the Internal Revenue Service. We'll see you online and again here tomorrow evening with Shields and G. Go, among others. I'm Jim Lehrer. Thank you and good night.
Brought to you in part by ADM. Feeding the world is the biggest challenge of the new century, which is why ADM is conducting research into aquaculture and other new food sources. ADM, supermarket to the world.
And by New York Life, the company that was built with integrity, humanity, and strength. These are the values that have made New York Life the company you keep.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you. Video cassettes of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer are available from PBS Video. Call 1-800-328-PBS-1.
This is PBS.